right, all you glorious gamers out there. Welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot, and it does seriously help us out. So thank you very much for that. All right, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. Good to see you. How you doing?
Not bad. How are you getting on with all your work?
It continues to be pretty busy in Lewis land. Not gonna lie, but it's it's what it is. It's always this way at this point in the year, so it's nothing new, I should say.
Oh well. But Lewis, what have you been playing? More importantly.
Well, Mark, this week I've started the brand new HD remake of The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, which has just launched on Nintendo Switch.
Very nice.
Only been playing it for a night or two, given it just dropped on Friday, and I've been doing some other bits and pieces. But yeah, this game is one I've been really looking forward to trying out. It was kind of got a bit of a bad reputation, the original. It actually reviewed really well originally, but has kind of over time, its reputation has declined, should we speak. And that's mostly about the motion controls, which is the main thing that is obviously being sorted out here in this remake.
Indeed.
I'll come back to that maybe in a wee second. First of all, just to say, it looks really good. It plays pretty well. It's got quite an interesting story set up. It's set before the events of pretty much the entire Legend of Zelda series.
Yeah, I think that's right. This is like the first one, technically, isn't it?
Essentially, yeah. It predates narratively anything else that's happened. It's it's obviously come out a lot later than most other ones, but it's set in this, or it begins at least in this place called Skyloft, which is a floating island above the earth. I would say that there's interesting things happening in this game that point towards some of the direction that Breath of the Wild 2 might be taken, and that's only from the first hour or two of playing it, really. There's verticality, there's islands in the sky, there's skydiving, there's a lot of
Sounds familiar.
Yeah,
Sounds
there's
familiar.
things that we've seen there in that trailer for Breath of the Wild 2. So, but yeah, the main thing, as I say, is this switch up of the motion controls, where now instead of using motion, you can still use it, but Christ, why would you?
Absolutely, correct. Why would you, ladies and gentlemen? Why in God's name would you?
So they've now instead mapped the motion controls to the analog sticks, but most kind of importantly, I think, to say is that on the Wii, you controlled Link's sword slashes with the right nunchuck, and on this version, they've mapped all the sword movements to the right analog stick, and that means that there isn't a natural free camera in the game.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's the one thing to get used to, and I'm not used to it yet, and it's the one thing that's kind of slowing me down a little bit in the game. The camera will move as you move, but it's a bit slower than I think we would typically like in a game. When you're used to free control of your camera, you shift it around all over the place, you use it to see round corners before you've reached them, all that stuff. You line up your jumps properly, and the camera movement itself isn't the quickest. It's kind of okay, but basically to make the free camera appear, you have to hold the left trigger, and then your right analog stick becomes the camera. And so there's just something there that is going to take a bit of getting used to. It's not part of my muscle memory yet, and so there's been times where I've kind of I've mistimed a jump, or I've missed a slash at an enemy because I'm expecting to be looking one way and I'm sort of looking the other way. But in saying that, the combat does feel really fun and really quick using the analog stick. You have a couple of different moves you can use. There's side slashes, diagonal slashes, a stab, and a kind of finisher move that I've got so far. And all of that is quite fun, just using the analog stick to slash around like that. It kind of almost reminds me in a way of the old Fight Night games where, mimicked the movement of your hands. It's kind of like that. So I'm not very far in at all. As I say, the opening section is pretty heavy on exposition and on story and on tutorials. It tries to impart a lot to you, so I was kind of stuck in a lot of that for a while, but I'm down on what I guess is Hyrule now. I mean, Link doesn't even know where he is yet, and starting to explore, starting to look for Zelda, expecting some really good dungeons to come up, some really good puzzles. That's what I've heard about this game, at least, so I'm looking forward to it. It's one that, as I say, I've been looking forward to, and I'm quite ready to get stuck into.
Cool, nice one, man. Well, to jump ahead a little bit, Lewis, one of our shout-outs this week was supposed to be The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword HD Remake has come out this week. So I guess we'll just do that now. It's currently sitting with an 81 on Metacritic, which, as you pointed out, is actually quite a lot less than the 91 the original game had on Wii. However, the game is 10 years old now, so it's completely reasonable that an effectively decade-old game would not have as high a score in today's world, you know? That being said, some of the foibles of the original still seem to be there, and I think that you have perhaps touched on some of them already. Yeah. However, I think that people generally agree that Nintendo have done a good job at translating the motion controls to the Joy-Cons, which is great to hear you say that you're enjoying it, because I think that that is the reaction of most people, is that, like, yes, this is a good move, we don't have to use motion controls anymore, huzzah. And more importantly, this is definitely the best way to play Skyward Sword now, which I think is all you can really say for a remake. Do you know what I mean? If that is the case, you've pretty much succeeded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's all it needs. If it gets more people into the game, experiencing the story, and kind of rehabilitates what was, you know, as you said, a 91 scored game originally, I think that is all you can ask for a remake, absolutely. Yeah,
as you said, maybe got a bit of a bad reputation throughout the years. I'm excited to play it as well. I might get a loan of your copy when you're done there, Lewis, but I sense that you might be playing it for quite a while.
Yeah, me too. It's not the shortest game, I should point out, so I might be with it for a little while. Anyway, Mark, what have you been playing this week?
Well, Lewis, I have bought, played, completed and platinumed Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart this week. It's been good. It's been a good week. It's been a good week. Honestly, it's been an absolute joy to play, coming off some heavier games, I would say, whereas this one is just light and breezy and fun and challenging, but not too challenging. It always makes you feel powerful. All the obstacles are relatively easy to overcome, but it's all fun, do you know what I mean? It's just good, and it was exactly what I needed, do you know what I mean? It was just a bit more lighthearted than a lot of the stuff that I was playing recently. I do have to say that this game looks absolutely incredible. I was playing in the performance ray tracing mode, and I think that this is the first time I've really appreciated just how much ray tracing can matter in a world. Do you know what I mean? It just makes the world feel that much more alive. And in that mode, I never experienced a single frame drop that I was aware of. So if you're playing this game, I would highly recommend that mode. From a technical perspective as well, all this using the rifts and loading new worlds basically instantaneously is all very impressive, basically every single time that it happens. However, I do agree with the sort of general criticism that it was a bit underutilized in the moment-to-moment gameplay. I'm not entirely sure what I would do to change that up. Literally maybe just more of them in the map, like just these points that you can zoom about to. But I would like to have seen that used a bit more creatively, honestly. I'm also slightly disappointed that Ratchet and Rivet, the new female Ratchet, play exactly the same. Like, they are exactly the same characters. When you get a gun for one, they both have it. When you get a new accessory for one, they both have it. There's no difference in the gameplay whatsoever, or so far as I was aware of anyway. And that to me seems like a bit of a missed opportunity, frankly.
Is that tied to the story in some way, that they get the same objects and stuff? Or
well, the whole story is, without getting into spoilers and whatever, but you're supposed to be in a sort of alternate universe, and I think the trailers and whatever made that quite clear. And Rivet is supposed to be the Ratchet of that world. Do you know what I mean? So narratively, I suppose you could justify it in that capacity, and the characters do work narratively. There's nothing wrong in that way at all. And in actual fact, I think the introduction of the new characters is actually pretty good and pretty refreshing for the series. But I think that, fucking hell, I mean, you could have given them some difference. Do you know what I mean? Rivet has a hammer and Ratchet has a ratchet. That is literally the only difference. Yeah. She's blue and he's sort of orange. Do you know what I mean? But they otherwise play exactly the same. And I'm just like, you could have done more here a little bit, Insomniac. Having said that, it was fantastic. I really enjoyed the game. Like I said, I platinumed it. It was actually very easy to platinum after I'd cleared all the maps anyway. I would highly recommend anyone played this if they had a PlayStation 5. It really does show off some of the more interesting things that these next-gen systems could do moving forward as well, you know. Particularly in terms of ray tracing, and like those instant loads off the SSD drive are just very, very impressive to see. But above all of that, the game is just gorgeous and fun to play.
Nice. I mean, that does seem to be the two key things about a Ratchet and Clank game, really, particularly in the modern era, that it should be beautiful and it should be fun. And I think you said to me, you know, off air in a text the other night that it was just kind of never too challenging and never too difficult, but just always really engaging and really fun. And I think that's,
absolutely, man. That exactly.
Like, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's a kids game because it's absolutely not a kids game, but it's more family friendly than a lot of the games that we might play and talk about.
Kids. It's definitely targeted to kids. There's no dicing around that, but that doesn't mean that it's a kids game. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely,
I would recommend anyone of any age play this because it's just so much fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Lewis. And with that, onto the news. All right, news item number 1, Lewis. Valve have announced a new handheld console called the Steam Deck. This comes after months of speculation around Valve re-entering the console space and rumours of potential new hardware, and they have basically released the Switch Pro that we were all looking for, Lewis. Hardware-wise, the Steam Deck has a 7-inch 60Hz LCD screen with 1280 by 800 resolution, a custom AMD APU with 4 cores and 8-thread CPU, a GPU with 8 RDNA 2 compute units with 16 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM. It also has full-size joysticks, 2 mouse-esque trackpads, 4 programmable back buttons like a SCUF controller, and fucking Bluetooth, Lewis. Jesus Christ, yes. Now, if the vast majority of that didn't make any sense to you, join the club. However, practically, this means that the Steam Deck can play games like Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, for instance, on high graphical settings with little to no issue. The price of this starts at $400 or 350 quid here in the UK, and that comes with 64 gig of eMMC storage, but there are also 2 NVMe SSD options as well, starting at $530 or £460 here in the UK for 256 gigabytes of SSD, and the more expensive one at $650 or £570 here in the UK for 512 gigabytes of SSD. All 3 versions come with an SD slot to expand the storage even further as well. The Steam Deck will run a custom version of Steam OS, which as far as I can make out is basically a Linux system, which did raise some concerns about compatibility issues. However, it does seem as though Valve are doing a lot on the back end to make sure that the full library is playable on the Steam Deck. They also point out that the Steam Deck was more of a, quotes, PC with a screen rather than a traditional console, as you can install third-party software on the Steam Deck, including other game launchers and Windows, and in fact you can actually completely uninstall SteamOS if you wanted to. And hint hint, for those of you that are interested, this could mean that you could emulate older games as well, wink nudge. I think for people like me and you, Lewis, this is frankly a godsend, an absolute godsend. If you're a hardcore PC gamer who doesn't care about portability, this probably isn't for you. You probably already have a system that is better than this anyway. But if you are a largely console gamer who dabbles in PC games, particularly indie games like me and Lewis, or if you're unable or unwilling, frankly, to pay for a high-end PC, at this price point, I think that this is a great deal. I really do. And I can safely say that Lewis thinks that this is a great deal as well because we have both reserved one.
We have indeed, yes.
But Lewis, I think that the best part of this announcement, honest to God, is the fact that it's not called the Steam Pal.
You're dead wrong about that, I'm afraid. Yeah, I think this is extremely exciting. It came out of the blue. It was an announcement that, although we'd heard the rumours about the Steam Pal, I don't think any of us were expecting I think it was last Thursday, just to get this news drop that this was happening. The console itself, or the PC itself, whatever we're going to refer to it as, this handheld Steam machine, I think it looks the part. It might well end up being quite heavy, but...
Oh, it absolutely will. It's an absolute unit.
Yeah.
But it's good. Like, hardware-wise, it's very, very impressive.
Other than, the problems of playing something that is a bit heavy in terms of portability, yeah, I think it's got everything that you were looking for in this. It's got those adaptive triggers like you're talking about. It's got I think those little mouse pads are really fun looking, and it does mean that it doesn't just become a handheld console machine. It is also allowing you to play a lot of games that would traditionally be seen as PC games. I think they were also showing off that you could play like first-person shooters and still have the accuracy of a PC rig using those, which would be really impressive if it turns out to be true. Everything about this, I find it hard often to get really excited about stuff in the gaming space because I'm fairly cynical and usually quite, expecting the worst in all things. But this, to me, I don't see a lot of downsides, particularly for people like you and I, as you say, Mark. Like, for me personally, I do play a few PC games. I deliberately bought a laptop that could run PC games relatively well, particularly at that kind of indie scale. I'm not massively interested in playing big AAA games. games on PC, but this means that it's just so much easier. I can play it sitting on my couch without having to go and plug in HDMI cables and make sure I've got a controller that is Bluetoothed up and all of that stuff. Like, for this, it just means I can dock it, I can play it, I can sit on the couch with it right in front of my face, I can take it to bed, and that access to the Steam library, and as you were hinting at there, Mark, various other libraries, my Epic account, my Xbox Game Pass account particularly.
Absolutely, that's a big one, I think.
Could be things that we can access. So to me, that is why I've gone on and reserved this. We'll see down the line. I definitely want to see some reviews. I want to see some hands-on stuff before I commit the full money. If you're not aware, the reservation process was basically paying £4, which if you cancel within 30 days, you get back. And if you don't cancel within 30 days, you get it back on your Steam wallet, which means I'll just use it to buy some other game down the line. Totally fine. It's not a gamble, not a risk. I don't really know why. Again, if you're someone like us who would consider this, why you're not looking into it. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and just a very small point on that. The reason that they were doing that £4 and their whole reservation process was to sort of fight the scalpers effectively, and is definitely something both PlayStation and Xbox can learn from.
Absolutely, yeah. They even added to that you had to have bought something through the Steam store before June of this year or whatever, so you couldn't set up a new account and do it right away. It was really smart. The whole thing was well done. They announced it, they gave you a couple of days to digest it, they put them out for reservation. They even did the hands-on with IGN, which meant you could get a bit of a sense of it before that point. I think Valve handled this really, really well, and they've made something that looks really impressive.
Absolutely, they have. Alright, Lewis, news item number 2, or sort of news item 1.5, definitely piggybacking off of the Steam Deck news here. It is nearly impossible to talk about the Steam Deck without comparing it to the recently announced OLED Switch. And it is worth pointing out that Nintendo have also confirmed that they are not making another Switch model as well. The OLED Switch is all we've got at the moment, which might have a better screen and might being the operative word there. As what I just said as well, it is quite significantly lighter and quite a bit smaller as well than the Steam Deck, but that is very much where the winning stops in terms of hardware for the Nintendo Switch. In every measurable way, really, the Steam Deck absolutely crushes the Switch, and I've heard it said on more than one occasion that it is basically a generational difference in terms of hardware. The Switch is not even close here, and in actual fact, the Steam Deck draws a closer comparison to the Series S than it does to the Nintendo Switch. And I think that really puts an emphasis on just how underwhelming that announcement of the OLED Switch was. We were all very hyped for it. I certainly was anyway, looking forward to a Switch Pro, which I don't really think the OLED Switch is, to be completely clear, but also what can be achieved in the handheld space as well, and more importantly, what gamers want in the handheld space and what they are willing to pay for in the handheld space. Although, having said that, the price point from the cheapest Steam Deck to the OLED Switch isn't that significant, to be honest with you. I think in the UK it's £40 to go up from the OLED Switch to the cheapest Steam Deck, and that gets you a huge jump in performance and access to the gigantic Steam library, so it's quite an easy sell to people. It was also alleged this week, this is just a sort of bolt-on piece of information here, that Nintendo were making an increased profit from the OLED Switch as well, which has caused a bit of outrage, I would say. According to Bloomberg, the OLED Switch would only cost around $10 more to manufacture, but the price hike is $50. However, Nintendo have denied that in the same set of tweets in which they announced that there was going to be no Switch Pro model or no true Switch Pro model. So, Liz, what do you think of the Steam Deck as a comparison to the OLED Switch specifically?
Well, in comparison to the Switch, I mean, there barely is a comparison, as you're kind of
exactly. That's the fucking problem.
That announcement was really disappointing, particularly for the likes of us who've been talking about a Switch Pro for so long. Never mind for the countless people who were really banking on that idea and really wanted one. But I think there's a couple of things here. I mean, the Steam Deck does blow the Switch OLED out of the water. I think it does show that a Switch Pro was needed, or would have been successful at least, and a lot of people would have bought it. I do wonder if Nintendo possibly caught wind of this and knew that anything that they were already planning just wasn't going to live up to what Steam were offering anyway. Who knows on that front? I guess we probably will never know that. But the fact that Nintendo are now saying that they aren't working on anything else, and by the way, I mean, take that with a grain of salt, because they're not going to say in a tweet, oh, we are working on other models, because then they're going to torpedo the sales for this model. But I think it's fair to say that nothing is likely to come anytime soon, and if it did, it would have to be at least as good as the Steam Deck is. It would have to be around there for it to get any kind of traction.
I honestly don't think that it even does, Lewis, to be totally honest. I think that it just has to be noticeably better than the Switch as we currently know it. I don't think it has to be all singing, all dancing in the way that the Steam Deck is. The Steam Deck is starting to break in here. They really have to come in high end. I understand what they're doing. Also, their target market is slightly different. They're looking at playing big, huge AAA open world games on their handheld. Nintendo aren't really looking to do that. All they had to do, Lewis, was put a better processor in it, more memory, better graphics capabilities, and we would all have been happy. And fucking Bluetooth, Jesus Christ, Bluetooth. And we would all have been happy. Do you know what I mean? Put an OLED screen on it, and the updates to the Switch dock that they've already done, like put the Ethernet port in it, and make it 4K. These are not big asks in this day and age, and for them to put out the OLED Switch really was incredibly disappointing. But after the Steam Deck, it looks laughable, frankly.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, I think it does point out really that the Switch OLED isn't an upgraded Switch at all, you know, which we know and which we were saying before, but that basically the Switch OLED is just a replacement model for the baseline Switch. Like, I really think that we'll just start to see the baseline Switch come off the market over the next year or two, and that will be the only one. I take on board everything that you said there, although I do think that if Nintendo priced that version of a Switch as you're describing with 4K and with Bluetooth and stuff in the same way that they're pricing the Switch OLED, i.e. the Switch OLED is only a little bit cheaper than the baseline Steam Deck, and with all of those improvements you've got, I think the Switch Pro, quote unquote, would be really expensive, and then it does bear comparison back to the Steam Deck. But critically, I guess the thing that we're missing out in this whole conversation, Mark, we're talking off air a bit as well, and everyone has been about, like, has the Steam Deck come to eat the Switch's lunch? Like, is this the Switch killer that we've kind of been waiting on it in a certain sense? And I think it would be a real shame for Nintendo to have essentially revolutionised the handheld market with the Switch, only to then be trumped by another company down the line by not moving fast enough. But the one thing that we've not really touched on is that there is no game on the Steam Deck at all that I want to play more than I want to play Breath of the Wild 2.
Well, yes, to be honest with you, see when people were going on about, oh, this is a Switch killer, blah, 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 when this launches, even at launch, even in its launch month, I think the Nintendo Switch might outsell the Steam Deck.
Switch outsells everything.
Exactly. It is an unstoppable beast. Like, Nintendo Switch will be absolutely fine. However, in terms of the value that it's currently offering its fans, it's not even close to the Steam Deck. That, I think, is the point that we're trying to make. It's going to be completely fucking fine, but in terms of value, I think that the Steam Deck is blown out of the water, quite frankly.
Totally agree.
Alright, Lewis, news item number 3. Netflix plans to offer video games as part of its service within the next 12 months, and that is according to Bloomberg sources. Netflix have also hired Mike Verdu, formerly of Oculus and EA, to oversee gaming at Netflix. Netflix are looking to expand their gaming team in the coming months, and the company have already advertised for game developer related jobs. It is also worth noting that Mike Vendu's background is very much in mobile gaming, as he oversaw EA Mobile and has previously been the CCO of Zynga Games, Lewis, is that how we're saying that?
I think so, yeah.
Which previously released Farmville and Words with Friends. And that is the sort of thing I would expect Netflix to be developing. I think that they are much more interested in finding their Farmville than they are in competing with Xbox and PlayStation and Steam and these people, do you know what I mean? Netflix, despite denying getting into games only a few years ago, have sort of been threatening this for a while. They have done their interactive choose-your-own-adventure style games with Bandersnatch and Minecraft and Carmen Sandiego. Netflix now also have a pretty significant amount of shows based on video game IP, specifically thinking about Castlevania and The Witcher. They've also got the Resident Evil coming up, they've got Assassin's Creed coming up, they've got Cuphead coming up, they also have a whole host of Ubisoft IP that they're making TV shows for as well. Perhaps, Lewis, this announcement shouldn't be that big of a surprise, really, should it?
No, I mean, it shouldn't be a surprise for various reasons. As you say, they've already been working in the gaming space to a certain extent for a little while, and yeah, they've been threatening it, that's for sure. It's been hanging around. And also it shouldn't be a surprise because gaming is enormous business, and Netflix are an enormous business who are interested in making ever more money and anything.
Makes a lot of sense when you say it like that, doesn't it?
Yeah. You know, there's only so much you can do in terms of creating new TV content. I mean, obviously they'll continue to do that, but ultimately they're going to be looking at other ways to diversify and to bring other people in or to keep people in. You know, I do wonder, I mean, their subscription numbers are just off the charts, obviously, and more so all the time. But there will be a number of people who drop off pretty regularly, I imagine, from that. And so I hadn't considered really that idea that they might be looking at, as you were saying, like more like their Farmville than their big AAA experience. But that fits so well with that kind of subscription model where it's just kind of like, we want you to have something that, you know, you might choose tonight to watch the new show, you might choose to go back to watch Friends or whatever, but you can also dive in and just stick a couple of hours into this lo-fi, easy, not very tasking game. You can just put some hours into that, and that'll just hold your attention in the same way that all Netflix content is sort of designed to do. Just let it keep going, never say stop playing, you know. And so all of that does kind of tie up, and I can see that might be the direction that they go. And I would wonder though whether that would leave them on the outside a bit, considering what Amazon are doing with Luna and what Google have been doing with Stadia, unsuccessfully though they may have been.
Well, that is very true, Lewis, but that is in terms of their own development, and that is sort of where I thought this story would end, Lewis. However, news item number 4, or news item 3.5, or however we're saying this, we're playing fast and loose with the format here, ladies and gentlemen. Again, very much piggybacking off of the previous story, the plot has thickened somewhat when a data miner called Stephen Moser found an image of an N Games, and the N being styled very much in the Netflix logo vein. An image of a shark fin, which is apparently the working title of Netflix games, but crucially, he found an image of 2 DualSense controllers and an image of Ghost of Tsushima cover art in a data mine of the iOS Netflix app, which is very fucking interesting, I will say. Now, that is not necessarily indicative of fucking anything. I do have to say that up front. That doesn't necessarily mean a damn thing. They could be there for completely innocuous reasons, but it has fueled quite a lot of speculation that Netflix could be partnering with Sony to stream games. Sony and Netflix actually have a pretty good relationship, it seems. They have a pre-existing deal where Netflix is exclusively allowed to stream Sony Pictures animated films, and only last year, I believe, they signed a huge multi-year US licensing deal to exclusively stream Sony Picture Entertainment films starting in 2022. We have said for a long time that Sony really don't have the infrastructure in the same way that Microsoft do to really go at streaming full force in the way that Xbox are doing with xCloud. And in fact, Sony have had to make a deal with Microsoft to even use their Azure cloud computing service in the first place. So it really does make sense that Sony would partner with someone like Netflix to break into the streaming space. And as you said, Lewis, Netflix have a 200 million user install base, which is just absolutely gigantic. So in terms of getting your service in front of eyeballs, there's very few companies that would do a better job of that than Netflix. And if this is something that Netflix can do, if Netflix can stream games in the same way that Xbox are doing, or in the same way that Stadia were doing, or the same way that Amazon are trying to do with Luna, then this could be a very big deal indeed.
Absolutely, it could. What a left field thing to have come up.
Incredibly left field and weird thing, yes. A PlayStation/Netflix partnership was nothing that I had ever expected in my life, Liz.
Yeah, not in any major sense, although it does totally make sense. Particularly, I guess, when you bring in Xbox into this conversation and you look at the kinds of deals that they're doing and the streaming services that they're offering. You know, we've talked a lot about the potential for Xbox to end up going natively onto like Samsung TVs and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
You can see that PlayStation might be looking at all of that and thinking, we need an answer here. And, you know, one answer might be to do some sort of their own streaming service, you know, upgrade PS Now in some way and start embedding that onto TVs. But a partnership with Netflix, I mean, it opens up 200 million users, as you say. It also, you know...
200 million users.
And you could look at that and say, well, also, if the deal goes both ways and you say, well, if you get PS Plus, you've got a Netflix subscription as part of that. Well, there's 100 million users on PlayStation as well. You know, that opens doors for Netflix too. Not all of them are going to be using both services. So it's a partnership that makes sense financially. It's a partnership that doesn't make a lot of sense if, as we were just saying, if Netflix is interested in Farmville type games, you know, essentially like expanded mobile experiences. teaming up with PlayStation maybe doesn't make the most sense, but that is not to say that it's not a very strong direction for a Netflix gaming division to go down, because if they can get access to PlayStation's incredible IP, then why on earth wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you try and make that deal?
Well, yeah, absolutely. To be clear, what I was saying about the Farmville stuff, that was their IP. That was their stuff that they are developing, what Netflix are developing. But yeah, if you could get proper AAA games onto your streaming service, and not just any AAA games, arguably some of the best AAA games of the previous generation onto your system by partnering with PlayStation, that would be absolutely huge. Away you go, and you can just stream your games through Netflix, play The Last of Us Part 2 through Netflix, play Ghost of Tsushima through Netflix. That is mad. And yeah, it does sort of make sense. The more I talk about it, it does sort of make sense. But that would be a colossal deal. But as we said, this is flimsy evidence at best, I would say. But it would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would say that. Like, take all of this with a huge grain of salt, because this isn't the kind of partnerships that Sony have been making in recent years. I wouldn't be stunned if the appearance of something like the Ghost of Tsushima artwork is not more of a nod towards a TV deal in some sense. Actually, when you mentioned there The Last of Us Part 2, that's an interesting one, because HBO obviously have some sort of rights to The Last of Us IP at the moment for their incredibly expensive TV show, and I wonder whether,
they have the rights to make a TV show. They don't have the rights to stream the game.
No, not to stream the game, no. But, there might be some sort of overlap there, in terms of Netflix can't be promoted. We've got The Last of Us. Well, HBO are trying to say, we've got The Last of Us.
I do understand that, and to be honest with you, if the HBO series is getting as much money pumped into it as they are claiming that it is, which is an enormous amount of money, there might be some goodwill on Sony's part to go, do you know what, we'll hang off on letting them stream that. Anyway, let's finish off as we always do with a couple of shout outs. Shout out number 1 was Skyward Sword, and you can hear that at the beginning of the show. So we're going straight on to shout out number 2, and that is Death's Door, which has also come out this week. This is the indie game where you play as a crow in an isometric Zelda meets Hollow Knight style adventure game. It's currently sitting with a very impressive 87 on Series X and PC. And I would say that the reviews, Lewis, were almost entirely positive, if you can believe it. The gameplay, the story, and the atmosphere of the game have all been praised, which very much sets up for this to be a real indie darling, which is really good news for this guy in particular, Lewis, because I actually pre-ordered this game yesterday because it was on a deal. And honestly, I think the game on Xbox only costs £16 or something like that, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I managed to get it for $14 for pre-order on it, which I thought was an insane deal for how good this game looks. So everyone should play this if you have an Xbox or a PC.
Yeah, definitely looks like one to check out, and the review scores are really impressive. I read earlier that, and it could be wrong, but it was only made by 2 people, and I would want to check that.
If that's true,
it looks utterly amazing, and the praise it's getting is a huge reward for those guys if that is the case.
I mean, it might have 2 leads, but there's not. Surely
well,
not.
I don't know.
I mean, if you reach the credits of that game and 2 people's names come up, that would be absolutely ridiculous. Alright, let's shout out number 3. Ubisoft have announced a new FPS game called Tom Clancy's X-Defiant, which is a crossover shooter of the Clancyverse. The game will feature factions from Ghost Recon, The Division, and Splinter Cell. It will be a 6v6 free-to-play arena shooter. The game is still very much in early development, but you can sign up to participate in a quote-unquote early rollout phases, e.g. closed betas, which will begin on PC in the US and Canada on August the 5th. And which will include 10 maps and 5 game modes. The game will eventually be coming to PlayStation 4 and 5, Xbox One, Series X and S, PC, Luna, and Stadia. Lewis, this feels like a well-worn road that Ubisoft are on just now, because this game feels very much like Call of Duty meets Overwatch, and I don't know if anyone's excited about that.
Well, I certainly am not.
I certainly am not either. I mean, let's be fair though. I mean, this game is definitely not targeted at us. But, I mean, I've seen a lot of negativity around this and them just being really behind the times.
Yeah.
It feels as if they're always 20 minutes late to the new thing. Do you know what I mean? It's weird.
You could barely call it the new thing, even, given...
No, I know. It's how old's Overwatch? It must be nearly a decade old.
Yeah. Just the whole boom in first-person shooters like that. I don't know. I mean, like you say, it's not targeted at us, but I can't really tell who it is is targeted to, because the name and the branding on it makes it look like it's maybe aimed at, you know, younger teenagers or something, but how many of them are really invested in the whole quote-unquote Clancy verse, which is the worst name for a verse yet, I've got to say. But
I love it. I absolutely love it. Can I just say, I want to correct myself. Overwatch is only the 5 years old list, so they're only 5 years late to the party.
But yeah, the idea has been done. It doesn't even look substantially different from their other games, the games that it's bringing in a lot of the times, you know, other than that it's first person, but it's just all kind of grey military shooter vibes. Who cares, man? It's been done to death. They're interchangeable, all of these games, to me. They're completely one and the same, and this is just doing absolutely nothing. It looks like a cash-in, essentially.
Yep. And it's also another game Ubisoft have made free to play, which is a huge change in direction from them, who had previously been relying on AAA games. They've said vocally that they would be moving away from that, and it does certainly feel that way, because everything seems to be free to play now. Absolutely.
It's also another Clancy game that isn't Splinter Cell that they've made.
Yep. And the way that it's looking, we'll be waiting a long fucking time for that Splinter Cell game. Alright, listen, final shout out number 4. Phil Spencer seems to be suggesting that the Xbox controller could be getting an upgrade after he praised the DualSense again. Phil Spencer said this when he was featured on the Kinda Funny Gamescast this week.
We're definitely thinking about different kinds of devices that can bring more games to more places. There's probably some work that we'll do on the controller. I think Sony's done a nice job with their controller, and we kind of look at some of that and think there are things that we should go do.
This comes after Spencer complimented the DualSense in an interview with The Verge back in November, and after Xbox surveyed Xbox gamers asking them if they would like DualSense features on the Xbox controller. I suppose that Phil Spencer probably isn't the biggest fan of PlayStation for obvious reasons, Lewis, but he does seem to really legitimately like the DualSense. I would argue that Xbox have been ahead in the controller front basically since the 360. I would argue that even now, ergonomically speaking, the Xbox controller might still be more comfortable in the hands than the DualSense. However, Xbox made extremely minimal changes between the Xbox One and Series X controllers to the point that they are nearly identical visibly. PlayStation, on the other hand, went for a complete redesign, and because of that, I would argue right now, and I hope that this doesn't sound as if I'm being a Sony pony right now, but I would argue right now that there is really only one next-gen controller on the market, and that is the DualSense. And Xbox fans, if you seen that survey and you didn't want the haptic feedback and the adaptive triggers of the DualSense, you are a mad person, because they are so good and they add so much to the game. The controller feels so much more alive. Going back to an old controller, as I did when I went back to order Death's Door, I was using the old Xbox One controller, and by comparison it feels completely dead in your hands as opposed to the DualSense. It really does. I've just got used to that now, so anything less than that feels not great to me, which is ridiculous. And Xbox fans, you should really push for this, because it's really, really good.
Yeah, it's a natural thing for Xbox to do next. The DualSense has proven itself, and it will continue to be proven over the generation as developers do more and more with it. It feels great. I think it looks good as well. Not everyone's going to agree with that, but it makes sense for Xbox to do this. And I think it's nice that Phil Spencer can say that, you know, that he can admit that there is things that they can learn from Sony.
I would agree with that part. I think that Xbox's openness, and Phil Spencer specifically, his openness when it comes to stuff like that is absolutely great, and definitely something that I would like to see more of across the industry. Looking at you, PlayStation and Nintendo, it would be great if we could all just speak openly about things like this that are good about other consoles. Anyway, Lewis, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is, what could the platform holders learn from each other, Lewis?
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, so just following on from Phil Spencer's comments about the DualSense there, we've sort of seen hints of a world beyond the console wars, I think, within that, Mark. There's a possibility that these companies could recognise the strengths and successes that they each have, and even, God forbid, publicly acknowledge that their own product could be improved by taking something from one of the others. In this case, I know, it's unthinkable, but here we are. So yeah, in that kind of fraternal spirit, I thought this week we could talk about what other features or unique selling points points that each platform has that the others could look to borrow from their friends across the great gaming divide.
I like that. That's
So just to get us started, I wanted to ask you first, Mark, kind of on the back of that last shout out, is the DualSense the best thing that Xbox could look to take from the PlayStation at this point? And if not, what else should they be looking at?
Wow, that's a good question. I like that a lot. Honestly, it is probably one of them, I would say. I think the DualSense really is great. As I said, I think it is the only truly next-gen controller on the market right now. And it looks as if Xbox have acknowledged that and want to do something about it, to be fair to them. So yeah, I do think that is probably one of the best things that they could be taking. Apart from that, I would like to see Xbox, as PlayStation have been, support VR or something like that. Do you know what I mean? I suppose they're doing their cloud gaming thing there, but it would be nice to see them support another community of gamers. Do you know what I mean? I like the way that PlayStation are doing that with VR. Obviously Steam are as well, and it would be good to see Xbox get involved in that as well, because it would just put more weight behind that hardware, do you know what I mean, as a valid gaming experience that people want, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I hadn't even thought about VR, but I think that makes total sense. It feels a little bit like the problems with the Kinect scared Xbox away from doing anything that was a bit more out there, or a bit less usual, at least, in the kind of gaming space. So yeah, something about that all feels like it makes sense as well. You know, Microsoft getting involved in VR, you can imagine that happening down the line, so why not do it now? To add to that, I mean, my only real thing, and it's the obvious thing to say really about the relationship between Xbox and PlayStation, and I'm not going to say that Xbox need games the way that PlayStation do, but I think Xbox could stand to learn from the way that, particularly in the last generation, PlayStation have really made their key IP the sort of the stars of the platform, and I really feel like Xbox need to build some new heroes, and I mean that in a really commercial sense, not just in the fact that they are heroes, but they need some new hero products in the way that Master Chief is sort of their only one at the moment, whereas PlayStation have made their IP completely synonymous with PlayStation. You know, you cannot think about PlayStation without thinking about these figures, these multiple games across different types of genres that they've got there. And I think that is a strategy. Like, Xbox's strategy generally, I think, is absolutely killing it, but that is still something that I think they're kind of lacking, that would bring even more people onto the platform if they just had a suite of completely unmissable games.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that, and I think that obviously the Bethesda purchase,
Absolutely.
There's a huge amount to alleviate this, obviously, but I think in general, yes, they are a bit one note.
Yep.
You know what I mean? There's a lot of shooters. Even Bethesda are arguably a bit one note. They're all RPGs, do you know what I mean? And shooters themselves. Not that any of these games are bad, to be clear, but I think you're right. I think that Xbox is synonymous with Halo 100%, and Master Chief, definitely, without a shadow of a doubt. And Gears, I would argue, is probably a second there, but then after that, we're sort of swimming in your Fables and things, which hasn't had a release in a long time.
Exactly,
and
yeah.
maybe we're thinking about Forza for certain communities, but again, that is a thing for a certain community of gamers. It's not synonymous, do you know what I mean? You can't have a car as one of your flagship heroes. Yeah, I do totally understand that, yeah. I think that Xbox have more work to do on the IP front, but I think a lot of that work has already been done, frankly. They've put themselves in an amazing position. They've bought themselves amazing studios and Bethesda as well, like on top of that. Yeah, so I think that a lot of that is in the works. I think that
Absolutely.
Xbox have acknowledged that and that they are moving in that direction.
Totally,
so
yeah.
Fair play to them, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just about building out those new stars, I think, yeah. And so obviously Nintendo are operating quite differently from the big two.
God save me, yes they are.
But is there anything that you think that Xbox could stand to learn from Nintendo?
My thoughts here are sort of along the lines of what you were saying with PlayStation, and I think that Xbox need to diversify a little bit. It's all sort of bro dudes and whatever, and that comes from a certain time in video gaming, particularly the 360 generation, where Xbox, to be fair to them, were absolutely killing it. And a lot of that worked then, and I'm not sure that it works quite so well now. But from Nintendo specifically, more family-friendly stuff.
Absolutely,
Do you know
Mark,
what I mean?
absolutely.
More Mario-esque things. Xbox have never really had that, I don't think. I mean, I think that they had Banjo-Kazooie for a while. In fact, even that was on Nintendo,
It was originally, yeah. It's just that they own Rare now, yeah.
Oh, of course, that was it. Yeah, that was it. I don't really think that Xbox have really hit that very lucrative market, which Nintendo just owns, frankly.
Absolutely. That was kind of one of my key things as well. It's just that they don't have that kind of playfulness and variety in the games, exactly as you were saying when we were talking about PlayStation just a second ago, that Xbox's games tend to be in one or two genres. They're all quite serious. They're all set in space for some reason. And I just...
They're not all set in space.
No, they're
Most
not all
of them
set in
are
space. But when I think about Xbox games, I guess it's because I think about Master Chief. You know, you just think about Space Marines, guys taking off into the atmosphere. And
that's what I'm saying. It's very brooded, very taking themselves very seriously, which again is like this is not a slate against any of these games. That is a perfectly valid way to be. But yeah, some diversification would be good here, and I think that family-friendly stuff is definitely something missing from Xbox entirely, it feels like.
Definitely, yeah. And the only other kind of obvious thing to me was some sort of handheld system, which has proven so popular just now. But Game Pass and xCloud have basically... I mean, imagine Game Pass on a handheld, but you don't need to imagine it anymore because of xCloud. So I think that they've learned the lesson there already, and they've probably improved on it in a certain sense.
Who needs hardware when you've got software, right?
So moving on next to PlayStation, Mark, I mean, the obvious thing for PlayStation to mimic on the Xbox front is Game Pass. And maybe that is the only thing worth mimicking in a certain sense, but it's been said a million times. I'm not sure we need to labour that point. But to me, it's a thing actually, I'm going to come in first here because it's a thing that you mentioned in our shout-outs that I think is actually really crucial for the future of PlayStation, particularly the near future after a couple of rocky weeks that we've talked about for PlayStation on the show. And that is that I think they need presence and personality.
Wow, yeah,
when you
I'd
look
agree
at
with that.
When you look at Xbox, you know, Big Phil is out there. He's making comments like this one about the DualSense. He's involved in the community. He shows the human side of Xbox. He's turning up at conferences. He's turning up on podcasts. Xbox are showing up still at E3 and at the Game Awards. And, you know, they're turning up and they're appearing and they're making themselves be part of this community. And it's really just not PlayStation style at the moment. They've been more involved in the past, maybe. But I think they could really stand to get a lot friendlier. At the moment, the games speak for themselves, but that might not always be the case, and it might not always be enough.
I mean, Lois, I think that is 100% correct. I could not agree with that more. I think in terms of PR, I suppose, like Xbox are killing it in comparison to PlayStation. And I just don't think at PlayStation they have the personalities like Phil Spencer, who is a charismatic guy and he doesn't mind putting himself out there. I'm not really sure Jim Ryan is very like that.
No,
do you know what I mean?
At all.
I don't think Herman Hulst is like that. I don't think Mark Cerny's like that. The only one that I can think of that is like that and is a sort of fan favourite is Shuhei. But even that, he's sort of taken a step back from a lot of that stuff. He is more in charge of the sort of indie stuff now, rather than the sort of mainline PlayStation stuff, for lack of a better term. But yeah, I mean, fucking hell. Yeah, anyone that people that just associate it with PlayStation and like, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone to turn up at these events and just kind of be the face and the front for PlayStation. They might not need it right now, but I really think if the pendulum swings a little bit away from PlayStation again, they're going to need that fast. You know, they are going to need someone to go on to podcasts and represent what PlayStation means to people again. So that would be my main thing there. Yeah,
absolutely. I agree 100%. And speaking of Shuhei, Lewis, I think that one of the things that PlayStation have to do that Switch and Xbox are doing really, really well right now is promoting indies, and we have had a hell of a bad run with indie developers coming after PlayStation saying their services are not good enough, they're not promoting their games well enough on their system. These developers upload their game onto PlayStation Store and they are lost there. That has to change. PlayStation used to be so good with this and used to be so synonymous with a place where you could get really great indie games. I feel that more has to be done here to promote not even the indie games that PlayStation are promoting, because they do promote those games well, but I mean, I'm sort of talking even a tier down from that, because a lot of those games that PlayStation are promoting are well over $1 million probably to develop a lot of those games, you know what I mean? And I'm talking much lower down than that, because as we spoke about the other week, these are the developers that are going to be developing the next Last of Us or something. They're going to end up working for Naughty Dog, they're going to work for Sony Santa Monica, they're going to be driving the games of the future, you know?
They'll be the next Housemarque that gets bought up by Sony, you know?
Exactly. And we should be promoting these developers as much as possible, supporting them as much as possible, and for the biggest platform holder in the world not to be doing that and not to be really pushing that in the same way that the other platform holders are, I think is really bad look for PlayStation, and that is something that they should be changing pronto.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that 100%. Yeah. And then moving on to like what PlayStation could learn from Nintendo, they don't necessarily share a lot in common with each other, except that they make some decisions which gamers find a bit baffling sometimes. Nintendo perhaps more so than PlayStation. But one thing that I really think that PlayStation could stand to learn from what Nintendo's doing just now is what Nintendo is doing with the Switch Online. And now I don't mean the terrible online infrastructure that Nintendo has, not
Good
that,
grief, I hope not.
but the immensely cheap access to a chunky variety of games, classic games from the company's past, from that storied archive of Nintendo games.
Yes.
You kind of touched on it earlier, Mark, but if they could put together a package and think about the Nintendo Switch Online is what, £20 a year or something like that, you could pay that and have just sort of 30 PS1 classics just right there off the bat, on you go. I think that would absolutely kill it.
Yeah, and I think that is something that PlayStation could be learning from Xbox as well, is backward compatibility support. PlayStation are dog shit at that, and again, that is something that, just for gaming preservation, they should be better at, and they should care more about, frankly. They should care more about that than they do, because right now it seems as if they really don't care, to be honest. And I know that there's a difficulty around the PS3 in particular, but there is no reason why they shouldn't be supporting backwards compatibility on PS1 and PS2 games. They should be doing way more to support that, do you know what I mean, just for the wider gaming world, you know?
Absolutely, yeah, I totally agree with that. And but focusing on those games that make Nintendo, you know, such an important part of the industry, like we get access to on Switch Online, I think PlayStation should be positioning their own history in that way as well. And we saw it with Astro Bot. I think that's what they should be doing, is making a bigger song and dance about its own history, you know?
Absolutely they should. 100%, yeah.
So you have just touched on what I think the main thing that Nintendo needs to learn from Xbox is, and that is backwards compatibility. So I'm going to dive straight in there.
Go for it, man. Go for it.
And say that, you know, again, Nintendo operate very differently from these other two big companies, but in terms of Xbox's backwards compatibility, you look at what Nintendo does, it's still vaulting its games. It is making us pay repeatedly for the same game across different platforms. There was that whole crazy stuff with the Mario 3D All-Stars, which was put on sale and then pulled from sale after a while.
That was insane, to be fair. Yeah, that
total nonsense. I mean, all of that makes sense from a business perspective, but it's a terrible look for the gamer. And I think that Xbox is, as you were just saying, is absolutely leading the way on backwards compatibility, and Nintendo, it's really time to start living up to some of that and letting us get access to a lot more of the older games. Obviously, I've just been praising the Switch Online, but there's this huge gap in between the SNES games there and the Switch that we're not getting easy access to, and I really think we should be.
Yeah, I think really, I mean, the N64 is the big one, isn't it? Let's be honest, that is hugely missing. But not even that, like thinking of the other handhelds, the GBA and the 3DS stuff, I mean, that was huge. That was huge. And yeah, they should be doing more on that front as well, I think. I mean, PlayStation are the worst, to be 100% clear, when it comes to backwards compatibility. But yeah, I think that Nintendo could be doing so much more, because, as you said, I think Xbox is absolutely killing it in that regard. Like, I really, really do.
And so finally then, coming on to what Nintendo could learn or take from the PlayStation, I think we can almost come full circle in a sense and say they sort of need a DualSense, or at least a fully functioning controller, when I look at how badly my sticks are drifting while playing Zelda right now, Mark.
My God, yes. I mean, hardware, yes, just better hardware in general. And I suppose they could learn this from the Xbox as well, quite comfortably, I would say. But yeah, Nintendo have to put at least some emphasis on hardware, and it doesn't have to be all the emphasis. Like I was saying about the Steam Deck, like they don't need a Steam Deck, like, because they have something that the Steam Deck doesn't, which is all the Nintendo games. Do you know what I mean? Which is a huge selling point for the Switch. But can you just give us like a little bit more, like 10% more, and it would be so much better, you know what I mean? Just so that there isn't as bad pop-in in Breath of the Wild. It's one of the best games ever made, in my opinion anyway, and the pop-in is horrendous, and there's no need for that. There's absolutely no need for that, because we've just seen from a Steam Deck that hardware in a handheld does not have to be limited just because it is a handheld. They've put in top-notch quality hardware into that, and there's no reason why Nintendo shouldn't be doing that either. Their controllers barely work, as you were saying about the Joy-Cons. Mine are basically unusable at this point, to be completely honest. I don't use the standard Joy-Cons anymore because I can't, frankly. Yeah, they need to do something about that. I really think that the Switch very soon will begin to feel old.
Yeah.
Like really old in the face of 2 next-gen consoles and a Steam Deck.
Definitely, yeah. I think that's absolutely right. Like, hardware improvements are one thing. They just absolutely have to start looking at doing... Both the other consoles have done a much better job of mid-generation upgrades, essentially, over the last few years. Not that Nintendo never done this, but that obviously we've been talking a lot about the Switch Pro, but I mean, really, like, even bringing some of that DualSense functionality to the Pro Controller and putting out a Pro Controller 2 or something like that. Imagine playing Mario Odyssey, but with the haptic feedback of the DualSense. I mean, that would just be so good and so right for what Nintendo is all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with that more. I just think that Nintendo have to up their game in the hardware department, really. And I'm not saying that they need like a full next-gen console in the same way that we have for the Xbox and the PlayStation, but they just have to be doing more than they are doing just now. Do you know what I mean? They have to respect that things are moving on and they are standing still, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And we just never want to see Nintendo standing still and falling so far behind that they are not a kind of relevant part of this industry, because what they do on the software front is so special most of the time that it would be a real shame for that to drop away. Yeah,
they are absolutely tremendous at making video games. Everything else is the problem. Alright, Liz, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerSTOO.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really helps us out. I know I say this twice a week, every week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. And to anyone that's already done that for us, thank you so much. It genuinely does mean a lot, and you are an absolute legend to us. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Florence, a game that is so good, but it's a mobile game. You will have to get over that. It's only £3, I believe, Lewis, and it only takes an hour to complete. There's no reason not to play this, and it is the best mobile game I have ever played, and I will say this every single week until we play the game.
Yeah, definitely reiterate that. It's a special little game. It's not, if you don't like mobile games, don't think of it like that. It's totally different to a lot of mobile games.
If you're thinking of this in terms of Candy Crush, you're playing the wrong thing entirely.
Absolutely.
It's not even in the same ballpark.
It has a narrative. You can bear that in mind.
Yeah, it does. A really, really fucking good one as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week.
Thanks.